Just sit right back and you'll hear a tale of your faithful trip. It started in the firmament, and then we all got tricked. Life was great when we were young, with all the things we believed. Then it all got hard, unbearable, and we know we're being deceived. Forgotten, ignored, secret, and hidden. Topics that talk about how water is knowledge. Now drink from the fountain. Let's pour some on you now. Hello, welcome to Plain Mundane Show. I'm Alex. Today we're going to talk about something super interesting and a little bit scary for me, but actually not that scary considering what really happened. And I'm going to tell you about what happened and how I just figured out that it happened. I had an alien fifth or sixth kind encounter. What do you call it when you have a close encounter that includes meeting the aliens, communicating with them face to face, going aboard the craft, and perhaps, according to my mother, I flew off with them and came back and she waited forever, she said, in the yard. So I'm going to tell you how this happened. Now, if you look at this picture on the screen, this is the house I lived in. This is in Houston, Texas, and this was 1970. It was either 1970 or 1971, and I believe I was in first grade. And my mother also confirmed that. I was visiting my mother here in Houston a few years ago when I moved here, right after my father had passed away. And I would visit my mother often because she was bedridden with arthritic hip and things like that. And at one point I was cooking food for her and helping a lot around the house. And I would go over there a few times a week. And I kept having this dream, or I suddenly began spending time with my mother. I began to remember this dream, what I thought was a dream. But I remember distinctly, as a child, my mother coming into my bedroom. Now, if you look at this house, I can't use my cursor on the screen, but if you look at this house, this was my house that we lived in when I was from 3 years old till about 9. This is the house that I lived in when I was in first grade. If you look on the front of that house, see there's a light post in the front yard. Now, that light post wasn't there when I was a child. If you look at the window, that front of the house to our left of the porch, if you were on the porch facing the street on your right, that window in the front of the house, say between the air conditioner and compressor on the side of the house and the front porch, the window that's in the middle of the front of the house, that was my bedroom window. The one with the shutters on it. And right where that bush is, but there were no bushes. There was no front garden or any bushes. That was just a window and the grass. And I was in that bedroom, and what I remembered at my mom's house was that she came into my room one night in her gown, and she said, "Alex, I want you to come with me, and I want you to meet someone." And I remember getting right up, like I knew what she was talking about. And I said, "Okay." And I took her hand, and we walked out of my bedroom, down the hall toward that porch. We went up the steps, out the front door, out into the front yard, turned right, and walked toward this light pole. And what was in the yard? There were actually 2 of them. But something like this was in my front yard. There was a UFO landed in my front yard, and it was about as big as the proportions that I have it blown up there. It's a little off kilter. I selected a photo and could not rotate it, but that's about where it was parked. The door was open, and there was a ramp going down. We walked towards it. My mother was on my left side, and she was holding my hand, and when I got to the ramp, I went right up the ramp all by myself, and I walked in, and I turned right, and I was greeted by these beings, and I went inside. And my mother waited over by the door of the ship on the grass, you know, so with the stilts of the ship or the landing gear, she was like chest or head high in the doorway. So I inside the ship, if I looked back at the doorway, facing the outer wall of the ship, if I looked back at the doorway, I knew my mother was there because she was waiting for me in the grass. Now let me back up. Let me tell you the story how it happened with my mom recently, and then I'll get into more detail and what I have remembered since. And I'm telling you, it's not, I'm not scared of it. It doesn't freak me out. You know, like, what's the guy's name? The lumberjack in northern Arizona that was abducted and they made the movie out of, that fought with those gray aliens and took the tools they had and tried to maim them with them, and they got so scared of him they had to go get like a Nordic blonde being to come and talk to him, another human looking being. So somehow there are gray aliens and there are Nordic type aliens. And I know about people who've seen the Nordic types when I was in Chile. They seem to be near Antarctica and the southern tip of South America. A lot. That's another story. Maybe I'll make another video about that. But this has been in my life a lot. There's nothing I could ever do about it. You know, I just knew these things. You can't talk about it with people. And before social media, what were you going to say? You couldn't just call a TV station and say, hey, I'd like to be on TV and talk about something. Wouldn't go anywhere. So I'm talking to my mother at her house, but I'm remembering her coming into my bedroom when I'm 6 years old and taking me by the hand down the hall, walking out and leading me to this craft and introducing me to these aliens in the front yard. These gray, they were your typical gray alien. Okay, and I kept remembering, trying to remember to tell my mother, and when I would leave her house in the evening, I would say, shoot, I forgot again. I got to remind Mom about the alien dream. And all I wanted to do was share the dream with her and see if she knew about it, or if I had ever mentioned it, or it came up, or if it was some kind of important part of my life, or if it became a fantasy like my invisible friend, my mother and father may have thought, that I imagined the whole thing. So I wanted to ask her about it. Did she know anything about what I said about this when I was that age? So every time I would leave her house and forget, I would always remember driving home and go, shoot, I forgot to ask her again. So one night I'm sitting there in a chair by her bed, and we're watching the television or watching Chromebook, I think, and we were reading something. And I said, oh, by the way, I go, hey, I wanted to ask you, I've been wanting to ask you something. I keep having this dream, what I think is a reoccurring dream, of you when we lived in this house, coming into my bedroom in your gown, waking me up out of bed, but I was already awake, taking me by the hand and telling me you wanted me to meet someone. And we went outside, and there were gray aliens out there. And we went in the crack. And when I was talking to her, she just started nodding her head, and she goes, mm-hmm, yeah, yep. She goes, yeah, they were outside in that east yard. Mm-hmm. And I looked at her, I said, you remember too? And she goes, yeah, yeah. I didn't know what they were doing there. I wanted to know why they wanted to see you or what they were doing. And as I'm listening to her, I'm just like, what? In a dream? What do you do in a moment like that when something's so bizarre, you're telling your mother about a reoccurring dream? You just want to know if she knew about it, that you had this fantasy or this dream that you liked. Which I had another one about a boat that would visit me that would talk, which I actually wrote a science fiction book, and it's in the Library of Congress. It's a sci-fi novel under a different public figure name that I have. What a lie. It's just craziness. These things come out of your head and you think, where'd you get the inspiration from that? If anybody ever interviews me, it's crazy. It's a box of chocolates in there with what I can remember. So anyway, after talking to my mother, I've got the interview which is going to follow this. This is like an intro to the interview with my mother, which is going to follow this clip in the same video. Now, after I interviewed with my mother, I've since remembered getting up out of bed. I was awake and I knew there were beings in my front yard. And I went up to the window, that window to the left of that light pole, and I walked to the window and I looked out in the yard, and literally about 12 feet away from me, standing in the yard, is one of these. One of these is standing there, suited and standing there and telling me to come outside. And I vaguely remember I told him, I believe there was one, but there could have been 3 or more. There actually could have been 5 or 6. It's really hard. It's like trying to remember the details of a dream. If you had a dream that you went on a yacht with somebody and you went somewhere on a trip, what if somebody said, what was the design on the rope for the sails? What color was the cabin carpet? You might try to remember and vaguely have another hint of a scene come up. That's what it's like. I remember them outside my window wanting me to come outside, and I told them basically, no, I'm not coming outside without my mother. So what they did was they went and woke up my mother and told her to come outside and meet with them, and she did, because she wanted to know what they were doing at the house and why they wanted to see me. This is really odd. So now I have this image that is showing up in my mind that I do definitely remember, that I'm looking out that window and I see my mother walk out of the front porch and turn right and walk towards that spacecraft. Here, let me get rid of the alien face and show you that. From the porch, by the top of that U-shaped driveway, she walks over to the craft and I'm watching her out my window. And at one point in the interview, you're going to see, it suddenly dawned on me, I had this recollection of her turning over her shoulder and looking at me. And she knew I was looking at her out that window. She knew that I was awake. She knew that they wanted to see me. She knew that I wouldn't come outside without her. And she knew what her purpose was out there. And she wanted to know what they wanted with me as a protective mother. She was going to kick their asses. So it's odd. So this is the story it's going to follow. I'm going to show you the interview with my mother at her place when I went over there a few months ago. I made a video about this and I uploaded it. And I don't know what happened, but somehow it has not gotten 1 view in the last 3 months. It just shut off and quit getting views on such a crazed topic and popular topic and hot topic that people like to look up on social media. And that video just stopped at less than 100 views and it hasn't budged. It's like someone shut it down almost. So I decided to make this again and add this that I'm doing right now, the intro before the interview, so that you know what it's about and what's been happening actually lately. So what do I remember now? I do remember walking up to my window in my bedroom and looking out and seeing the aliens standing there. And when I told my mother what was in the side yard, she said, the ships, the crafts. And I said, you're saying plural? There was more than one? And she goes, I think so. And then I'm thinking, and I seem to remember also that where I have this ship photo planted there, if you go to the left of that, more deeper in toward the backyard, there was another ship parked next to it, slightly behind it, closer to the neighbor's house. But I think it left. I think I saw it leave. For some reason, there were about 6 aliens in my yard from 2 craft. And one of them left. And when I went into the craft, I remember 3 of them that were speaking with me. And I remember I went up in the craft, and as soon as I walked up the ramp, no steps, I went in the doorway, I was greeted. I don't really remember what was said, but I turned right. The craft is much bigger on the inside than it is on the outside. Because if you look down the hallway, it just looked like this big radius curve, but I could have walked around it. Like on Star Trek, when you see in the old Star Trek series, when they walk around the hallways and they're talking and you have the extras walking by, in the hall, and it's this curved hallway. It's supposed to be the top of the Enterprise, that round part. It was like that on the inside. The hallways were big. But they were showing me screens that were on the outer walls. So as I'm looking at screens, and I remember they were showing me scenes. I do remember one scene was very woodsy. It had trees and meadows, and it was something about nature. But I think they were trying to get my reaction to things. I don't think that they were showing me things. I don't think that they were showing me the future. They weren't showing me what I was going to do in my life or anything that I was supposed to do in my life. I don't think they were trying to guide me or mold. I think they were testing me. And I actually think I failed that test miserably for some reason unknown to me, because they haven't come back and I've never had that experience again. Uh, the only thing possibly similar that I've ever had was one time I had a demonic attack in a basement where I had that paralysis where I couldn't breathe and had to rebuke it, and this black swirling mass in my room, could not even see the window. Between the bed and the window, I could not see the window in my room because of the being that was in it. But I don't know if that's the same and they're interdimensional. Another question that I've had is, if you hear about beings on these other reports that come right through the ceiling and the craft is hovering over the house, and they come and get you out of your bed and levitate you, and you go right through walls or windows or ceiling, why didn't they just walk right through the window at me and come pull me out of my bedroom? Why did they respect what I said and go get my mother? Because you ought to hear her story. With the way she woke up, she knew there was a craft in the east yard, she said, and she went outside to see what they wanted and why they wanted me and what they were going to do and what their purpose was, to see if she was going to allow them to talk with me and for me to go aboard. Turns out she thinks she went aboard and she probably flew off with them, because at one point in the interview you're going to see, when I ask her, I even had this tone in my voice like, why didn't you go inside with me? You left me alone. And she said, perhaps I'd already been in there and flown off with them and came back. And I think now, as I'm trying to remember, looking out of that window, I watched my mother do that and come back. And I waited, but I was in my bedroom. And so by the time, what I first remember of this whole thing just a couple of years ago, my mother coming to the corner of my bed and going, come with me, I want you to meet someone. I already knew what she was talking about, because I already watched her go and I'd already seen them. I'd already told them I wasn't coming outside. I already knew where the craft was. And as soon as she said, I want you to meet someone, I was excited, because now it's okay. They're cool and my mom's with me. So it's like, I'll come out. I got mom with me. And I came out. It's an interesting interview. And this, what you're looking at when you see us talk, are two people who have had this memory suppressed for, let's see, 1970, 80, 90, 2000, almost 50 years now. And it comes up as a dream that I remember, and then she's in it and she has the same experience. So this actually happened. More details are coming to me, and I might share those later and make another video. But let me take you into this video. This is what the video looks like that I uploaded a few months ago. This is me and my mother talking at her place in her living room. And we're just live on camera, on this same camera, on this same computer. I took it to her house. It's my notebook computer. And I turned it on and said, let's talk. And she was okay. And she knew what it was about. She was all dressed up and ready to go. Like, she knew. And she provides some awesome information and input. But this reminds me a lot of, there's a guy, Dan Burrish. Have you heard of Dan Burrish? If you've ever watched Project Camelot and Carrie Cassidy, she interviewed this guy, Dan Burrish. And he's on Majestic 12. He's on MJ12. I know personally another person who's on MJ12. And I mentioned him in the video in the interview with my mother. So if you want to see who that is, watch the video. You'll be shocked. I actually met him the same year that he met the EB. I'm not going to get into that. So Dan Burr said when he was a child, about 6 or 7, he was playing ball in the yard with his grandfather, and a craft landed, and he went aboard, and his grandfather waited for him forever and sat under a tree. And then when he came back, he said his grandfather never spoke about it again. And Dan remembers it, but I think, according to what happened to myself and my mother, his grandfather could have had his memory wiped and just doesn't talk about it because he doesn't remember it all. And I don't know why it came back to me, and my mother remembers it now. And in the last 2 years, this thing is just pouring out. But it goes along with other experiences other people have had. It was a friendly abduction. It wasn't scary. They just showed me things and they talked to me. And at the very end, they wiped my memory. They showed me, just like Men in Black, a silver-looking wand device. It had buttons all over it. And I thought it was really cool. And the first thing I asked the being, and I would listen to this, I was 6 or 7 years old. They were my same height, which goes along with about the height that people say they are. And if I'm a 6-year-old kid, they were just slightly inches taller. And I remember not looking down at them, but about shoulder height or slightly 2 or 3 inches above my face. It was their face. But their faces were blurred out, and I don't remember seeing their faces exactly. But at the same time, I'm going to show you something else. I have another video before we get to the interview with my mother. I have another video about the Roswell crash and how I know someone who cleaned it up. He was an MP in the Roswell Army Air Force. And on July 8th, around there, when the day after it crashed, he was brought to the site and taken there to clean it up. And he was an MP, so his duty was to stand around the craft and make sure no one approached it. But he got to look at everything. He stood on next to this blanket and saw these 2 dead ones on the ground, and he described them to me. This was my bishop at church. This was a Mormon bishop at church, a black man, actually the first black man to ever be a bishop in the Mormon church in New Jersey, right after my graduate school when I was traveling around the world in some of these things I've shown you. And just one night while the youth, I was young men's president, and while the youth were playing basketball and we were waiting, and it's real quiet in the hallway, and we're sitting in the halfway lit hallway, just waiting to go home, give everybody rides home. Hey, you ever hear about that Roswell crash or this? And I said, yes, I have. My mother told me about that. Now, this was in 1992. Email existed, the internet existed, but you had monochrome screens, and we had CompuServe email. There wasn't text or smartphones, or you couldn't just go Google. Google didn't exist. You couldn't just go find Roswell crash and dig up pictures, right? But he told me one of the beings he looked at, he said they had these suits on that looked just like Remy, the actor's suit in The Day the Earth Stood Still. And that freaked him out. After his military service, a couple of years later, he was married and watching that movie. And the details in that movie, somebody that was at the Roswell crash contributed to making that movie. And it scared him to never talk about it. So what was I going to, oh, so he told me one of the things, he said one of them had these really dark cheeks. And he said, I couldn't tell if, he says, I'd never seen one before. He says, I couldn't tell if they were made that way. You know, like certain reptiles have different colored skin on different parts of their body, or darker skin, and then he said, or if it was burnt. He said it kind of looked burnt, down its neck and to its chest and everything. I was like, wow, really? And I remember going home and telling my wife at that time, wow, you should have heard what the bishop told me tonight while the kids were playing basketball. Wow. He saw an alien crash in this flying saucer at Roswell. Have you ever heard of that? And she's like, nope. Aliens. That freaked her out. But I knew about it. My mother had Philip Corso's book, The Day After Roswell, when I was a kid. And my mother always talked about it. And all the UFO movies, and the ones where the teenagers find the aliens in the woods with the alcohol coming out of their fingers, and the hand crawls up the back of the seat of the car, and they go try to the farmer's house, but they smell like alcohol. And it turns out the aliens have like needles in their fingers, and it shows one where the alien's getting in a fight with a cow near a barbed wire fence, and its eyeballs made out of styrofoam. Really cheap Hollywood movie. Have you ever seen that one? What was it called? The Eye Creatures? In the 50s. My mother loved that. So I remember watching that when I was 6, 7, 8 years old. My mom, and just being scared to death. And I never, ever wanted to look out a window. In my entire life, I don't look out of windows at night when there's blackness and I can't see outside. I don't look at a window because I don't want to look out of a window and see an alien staring back at me. And I found out lately that's because it happened to be. But let me show you these dark burnt cheeks. This is the alien that my friend, the bishop, saw when he was in the military as an MP. And when I found this picture, I looked up one day after reviewing his story in my mind. Um, what is it that these aliens look like? You know, there's all different types of gray aliens. They all have different shapes, and there's some that are fake, there's some that are latex, there's some that are wax, and you don't really know what's true. I believe this picture is actual picture of a dead, real gray alien you're looking at, because the burns on its face and neck are exactly where my bishop put his hands, and it's the left cheek. And I found this picture one day. This was probably later on, like in 1999 or the year 2000, when I found this picture, and I was like, it took my breath away, because it's exactly the picture I had in my mind that he described. So what else can I tell you? I'm trying to fill in some details so that this video has more detail. It's a little bit longer. You can watch it all the way through, I would suggest. But even if you don't, at least the view time, you know, most people watch at least 20 to 25 minutes of this video. And I have a lot more details in it. So the interview with my mother. Let's get to that. And thank you for coming. Now watch. Are you ready? Here we go. This is neat. When it turns red. There we go. Okay, we're on. Hi, people. Welcome to Plain Mundane Show. This is Alex. And my mother, this is Judith. And what we're going to do today is we're going to have a discussion about aliens. We're going to talk about aliens. We're going to talk about a UFO encounter that we have discovered in the last, 2 years? 2.5 years?
Come back to remembrance.
Yeah, it just, we both remembered this and realized we were together and it wasn't a dream. We had a fifth kind encounter. I think the UFO scientist, his name is J. Allen Hynek, Hynek, I think it is. Hynek is the one that made up the nomenclature system of close encounters of the first kind, second kind, third kind, fourth kind, fifth kind. If you see a UFO somewhere in the sky, that's the first kind. If it's the second kind, I think it's closer than 500 yards. If it's the third kind, the UFO got close to you and your reality was affected, or something happened to you, or maybe you saw something through the window, maybe an alien or whatever. Fourth kind is when you actually have communication with them. Fifth kind, I'm not sure whether we had a fourth kind or a fifth kind. What do you call it when you go in the craft and you're having conversations with these beings for an hour or more? I think we had a fifth kind experience. Close Encounter of the Fifth. What was that movie called that Spielberg? Was that the third kind? Which really wasn't the third kind. It was the fourth or fifth kind. I don't know. I think we had a fifth kind. So what happened, Mom? What do you remember? Let me set this up first before we go into it. I went to my mother's house about 2.5 years ago, and I kept trying to remind myself when I would go visit her. I'd be like, oh, I got to remember to ask Mom about this dream. And I don't know why. I just wanted to share it with you and see if I think I was just trying to see if I told you about this when I was a kid, or if you knew about it. And I said, Mom, I kept having what I thought was a reoccurring dream of an alien fifth kind encounter in my front yard. If you look at the picture on the screen at the top right, that's the house. Look from the corner, right from where I took this picture this morning, that's the actual picture from today. I took that picture on the way over here. In the grass, if you go across the grass to the house, the first window on your left, that was my bedroom window, my front. And in the middle there's a U-shaped driveway, and there's the front porch. Those are both in the experience. So I got a picture, and I came over, and we're going to do this broadcast. So when I started to tell my mother about this, I said, you came in my bedroom, and you got me out of bed, and said you wanted me to meet somebody. And we went out into the front yard. And she started nodding. She goes, yeah. She goes, yeah. We went out they were over in the side yard up by the ditch, and she goes, you remember too? What? So we're both realizing that
we had our memory wiped or something happened. Maybe they didn't even wipe anything. It was just so traumatic, our own brains took it out. So how did it start for you? When did you, were you in bed asleep? And where was I? Was I in my room asleep?
You were asleep, I was asleep. And then became aware that these beings were right outside on the east side of the house.
You knew that from being in bed?
Yes.
That beings were outside in front of the house?
Yes.
So it was telepathic. And you knew it was the east side in this side yard? So you had to have known that.
We like to plant gardens.
Yeah, we used to have a garden in the back of that lot, didn't we? Well, I remember there was a pile of lumber or something that was always back there, or
We're building a chicken house that never got built.
Yeah, we were going to build a coop that never got built. But yeah, it was between the coop and the street right there. See where that light pole is? They have a street light now. I don't think we had a street light in the yard.
No, you didn't.
This occurred, when was it, 1969? I was in kindergarten or first grade. It would have been 69 or 70. If I was 5.
I think you were first grade.
I think I was in first grade because I remember I had show and tell at school. It comes up in the story.
You show and tell this?
I told them something they showed me I wanted to take a show and tell. And they laughed. Telepathically, they laughed. They thought that was amusing. I thought, wow, can I take this to school and show it to show and tell? And I remember they were my height, just a little bit taller. So if I was 5 or 6, probably 6, 6.5. Years old, and they were just a little bit taller than me, which would go with about the size of the craft. Anyway, so go back to what you were doing in bed. So you know there's beings out in the front yard. Did you just get up and go look?
I'm wondering what the heck they're doing there. Are they a danger? Were you out in the yard there already?
No, but I have a vague recollection that I was already awake in my room doing the same thing, looking out the window at them. So I think, anyway, you go ahead.
Well, I just remember I got to get out there so I can monitor what's happening.
Oh, really? Yeah.
Because I didn't know if they had called you out there or what had gone on.
What about, I won't say her name, what about my sister who was there? Was she involved or was she?
Nobody was involved except just you and I.
Okay, that's right. For me. So the first recollection I had of this memory when I first told you about the dream was I remember you coming into my bedroom and saying, "Come here, I want you to meet somebody."
I don't even remember.
Do you remember that?
Mm-mm.
But I'm thinking now, I'm having a vague, it's like when you try to remember a dream when you just woke up and 15 minutes later you can't remember what you were dreaming about, but you have a vague recollection of what it was, maybe a scene. Same thing. It's like the movie The Hangover. I kind of remember looking out my window and seeing the craft and some beings. There might have been one right at my window looking at me right through the window where that bush is.
And as a parent, I look back and think, why didn't you go to your dad and tell him? And that's when he worked for a company in the north.
Mm-hmm.
And went out of town and had meetings in that state.
Is that Ohio? Do you know he worked at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base?
Yeah.
Do you know he told me that right before he passed away.
Huh.
I said, "You worked at Wright-Pat?" And he said, "Yeah." I said, "What did you work on?" He said, "I don't remember." But that's where the UFOs are. That's where they took the aliens, allegedly from Roswell to Wright-Patterson. And that's the company that Dad worked for was in a town right next to that Air Force Base.
That's interesting.
Yeah. There's a lot of history coming out. So, anyway, so go ahead. So you were wondering why I didn't go to Dad?
Well, I knew he wasn't there. I knew why you didn't go. You had good sense.
Yeah.
You just don't get things worked up.
Do you know, in my lifetime, I've always had a paranoia of looking out a window at night because I don't want to see the face of an alien.
Not until we started talking about this.
I mean, guys, maybe some of you, I don't like to be around windows at night because I don't want to look out because I think there's going to be an alien looking right back at me. And now yeah. And now I'm wondering if that's not what happened at this house, right? Because it's a super vague recollection. I think it was standing maybe 10, 12 feet from the window, just right there. And that's a tall vertical window that goes low. It's an upright window. It's like a full body window. So did you get up and go out in the yard? Or did you? You were by yourself. You weren't with me.
Mm-mm.
According to what I remember, if you came in my room and you said, come with me, I want you to meet someone. Maybe you came straight from the bedroom telepathically and you knew what to do.
Are you saying you went in your sister's room?
No, nothing to do with her. It was just, I was in my bed. I don't think I was asleep there. I might have just run and jumped back in my bed if I heard you coming. And so when you walked in, I already knew you were coming, and I got up.
You did that a lot, didn't you?
Didn't I? You know, kids are still up playing in the room. Mom's coming, they go lay in bed. But I'm just wondering if I saw you maybe out in the yard with them, and then they sent you back in the house.
Well, I was in the yard at one point,
Mm-hmm.
and I don't remember going out the front door to get there. I don't know how I got to the front yard.
Without me. This is by yourself. This is an experience you had by yourself.
Well, yeah, trying to figure out what the heck's going on out in my yard.
Because you asked me, you said when I went outside, you said, were they standing in the yard like this, and you had your hands on your waist, like your fists on your waist, like a coach, and with the whistle? And I said, no, I didn't see that. When I went out in the yard, I saw the craft, the kind of like a doorway was open. There was like a ramp.
Yeah.
It wasn't stairs, it was a ramp. And it was, but they were inside. I don't remember ever any of them in the yard, but you do. And now I vaguely remember one standing in front of my window. So somehow, what I want to know is, how did they know to come to my yard and come get me? It was either somebody we knew working at NASA, or my father, or for some other reason I can't even imagine.
Yeah, your father could still be working at Wright Patterson.
At that time?
Mm-hmm.
I did not know that. You know, I just found out it was in 2015. We were sitting outside his place at a picnic table, and he said he worked at Wright Patterson right after he got out of the Air Force. He was in the Korean War.
What year?
Oh, I don't even remember. And I remember I already knew a lot about UFOs and aliens and Wright Patterson in Ohio and the town of Dayton. And when he said he worked there, I went, really? I said, what'd you do? And he was having a lot of trouble with his memory. He'd had cancer for 10 years already. But he could not remember for the life of him. He was just like, I can't remember what I did there. But this is getting stranger as we talk more. But, so you were out there by yourself without me before you came back in?
I suspect I was.
You suspect. I almost have a vague recollection of seeing you in a gown walking that way from my window. You might have even known I was looking out the window. And you can't remember.
That sounds familiar.
Does it?
I would have done that to prepare you to not be frightened.
Yeah. You know, I look back, this was a friendly encounter. I don't remember, you know, you hear a lot of people when they discuss alien abductions or encounters with aliens, they were pulled out of their bed and levitated through the ceiling into a craft, and then they were poked and prodded and sexually abused, or some torture, you know, needles going into the uterus or the eyeballs or whatever. You know, there was none of that. There was no operations going on or any trauma. it was a friendly visit. Did you get any idea that it was negative?
You know the sign that we says that we hear it on movies and TVs is this "Do no harm."
Right.
That's a big sign on our foreheads. Do no harm.
Yeah. Do not harm me. So we went out in the yard. Well, what I remember is what I first started to recall a few years ago was you came into my room and you said,
Come see this.
"Come with me. I want you to meet someone." And like you said, you might have been thinking of a way to introduce me without being frightened. But I think I get the idea that I already knew who I was going to see because I'd already seen them. And so I was excited to take
In the
your...
movie, in the window.
You know, I can't see their faces. It's like their faces are blurred out.
Yeah.
But I think you saw their faces. Maybe they read your mind that I was going to be frightened and they hid their faces. So what did we do? I remember going down the hall with you, holding your hand. We went up through the porch, out the front door. We turned right and we started walking towards that side yard. Just right by that street light post.
Out by the street.
And they were up by the street, by the
That's
ditch.
by the neighbor's, that's by their driveway.
Right. Yeah, I took this picture in front of the neighbor's driveway. This is still incredible. We're talking about this and we're filling in all each other's details of a dream. So, I remember it was kind of a windy, breezy night too.
Warm.
And it was warm. Not sweaty warm, but it wasn't cold.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember walking out and you were on my left, walking across the yard, because when I went up the ramp, you let go of my hand and you stood on the grass by the craft, but you did not go up in with me. Why did you not go up in?
I have no idea.
Maybe they were sending some kind of command, like, let the boy go, let him come in.
I don't know. Maybe I'd already been in.
Maybe you went in and flew off with them and came back or something.
That just rang a bell. Flew off with them. I think that happened.
With you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Never thought about that before.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you, what was the experience for you? I mean, I told you I had this dream and we figured out you were there with me, but actually it was your experience and I was with you as well. Well, the only difference in my recollection is I was inside the craft and you were not with me. You waited in the yard.
So it could be your experience, not mine.
But you were there. It's weird. How do you explain an alien fifth kind encounter when you can't remember all the details, but you share the same memory? Woo. So.
Did you ever tell Dad this?
No, I didn't remember this before he passed away. It was like a year or so afterward. It just started coming to my mind. I'm kind of afraid to talk about it because if I'm over there taking pictures today and now we're talking about it, I don't want them to come back. If they know,
it's true.
It's true. If they know telepathically I'm trying to dig up all these memories and you are too, then they might come back.
If these are big bad brothers, that would be bad.
Yeah.
It's the same people as we had before. That's okay.
Yeah, if it was the same guys as before. But what I remember, when I walked out, I went up into the craft. You stood on the left side of the ramp. I went up in, I turned right. There was the boss alien person was there to greet me. And there were two others, but I got the feeling that they were like deckhands. They were just two deckhands on the craft. Let me use this. They were like two deckhands. And they showed me screens. There were like flat screens, like an like a tablet. But those didn't exist in 69 or 70. I remember I was looking, I was in the... For us, for them it did. That's true, I never thought of that. Technology existed, we just didn't have the revelation of it.
Yeah.
I guess that's true for all technology that we don't even know about it.
Mm-hmm.
So I walked in, I turned right, and I was looking towards the outer wall of the craft, which was much larger on the inside than it looks on the outside.
Okay, explain that.
I don't know, but it's like when you look from the outside, it was probably no bigger than what, 18 feet in diameter. But to me, I was a little kid, it seemed huge, but now I look and it was only like longer than a station wagon, or you know. So
But once you got inside, it extended the.
you were inside. Once you get inside, it's like there's rooms everywhere and halls going off, and I wonder if it's like a portal to another dimension and you're kind of halfway on the other side in their world or something.
Mm.
Blows your mind, doesn't it?
Well, it does.
But I remember they showed me screens. I don't think it was as much. I've had this idea that it wasn't as much as they were teaching me something, but they were getting my reaction to things. And they showed me things on screens, and I don't remember if it was violence or sexual or nature or science.
What if it was just for this thing you were doing right here? Just so that you could go and tell them what you saw and what happened to you.
So I could share in the future what
Yeah.
happened to me, because they wanted me to share.
Yeah.
So anyway, you were saying you were inside, and when you walked in, it extended?
You may have shared that with me because when you were telling me that you did this, I saw it in my mind.
Mm-hmm.
I saw going down a long hall. There wasn't a long hall there, but from the outside of it. But inside there's a long hall.
Yeah. And I've heard in other alien abduction experiences, people talk about the craft being much larger on the inside. There's more rooms and hallways than you can imagine, and it's just much bigger on the inside. So how the experience ended for me was I think as I walked in and I walked down the hall to the right along the perimeter wall on the inside, I was like on a perimeter wall looking at these flat screens. And the boss one was standing behind my right shoulder and the other two were on my left. And they were showing me things. And I just remember, I don't know if I was learning or seeing what I was going to do in the future. Or maybe I was being shown things so that they could read my reaction and see how I would react to things. But when they were done, they showed me this pen-looking thing. It looked like a remote. You know, like, you remember those pens that had all the different colors with the springs? And you had red, blue,
Yeah.
green, black. It was about that big around. It was kind of like those fusion razors that have the 5 blades. You know, it has got that big rubbery round-looking knob thing. It was a little bigger. It was like a fat pen, like a Mont Blanc pen, but a little fatter. But it was silver, and it had buttons all over it. And that's what I wanted to take to show and tell. They showed it to me. I remember the leader, he handed me this thing, and I remember taking it, and I was looking at it and trying to, and I was asking, what does this button do? And he said, push this one, I think. And that's the last thing I remember.
Oh, that reminded
But
me.
I asked him, I remember I said, can I take it to Miss Cooper's class and show it for show and tell?
No.
No, you can just push that button.
That was like, where the creatures from outer space that look like animals live in New York City.
Men in Black.
Men in Black. Remember look at our.
Yeah, the wand and it's.
Yeah, and I'm going, no, don't look. There you would have been.
That part seems to be real. So some of that effect in the movie were added from real experiences. And that just happens to be in my experience. But I remember they were amused telepathically. They were laughing. That I thought, cool, can I take this to school for show and tell? But I do have one vague memory walking back across the front yard with you back towards the porch. So I remember going back to the house.
Mm-hmm.
But I even have, I've thought about this for the last year and a half. I even have a memory of being in class at school the next day thinking, should I tell my story? Can I tell? I might have told my story. Who knows if I got up and I don't know. What if you were my school teacher and the kid got up for showing time? I just want to tell you about these guys that visited me last night in my yard. And they might have gone, great. Sit back down, please. I don't know. So what, now when you waited for me in the yard, when I was looking at screens, here's where we had a discussion about, I thought the door was open and we were on the ground the whole time, and your head was at the bottom of the doorway and you were just right there waiting for me to come back out. And the door was open the whole time, the ramp was down. Is that what you remember?
Pretty much. I have such little memory.
Oh, I'm right there, don't worry, it's not you. Like I said, I wonder if it was the trauma and the strangeness that made our own minds erase that. Or, well, they did have the device. I had it in my hand. Just like Men in Black, it works. That seems to be real. You said at one point that we took off and flew off and came back.
And a little, would it have gone back, shrunk back to a small cell? It would have had to have, because it would have been so big, it would have shown up on radar. And if they're trying to keep it small.
That's another thing. How does a craft land in that yard at night? What time would it have been? Maybe 1 o'clock in the morning, too?
Or two.
See? We just agree on the time like that. Like, yeah, it's just a given, but we're talking about a fifth kind encounter. It just still shocks me. Yeah, 1 or 2, we both just said. Yeah, like remembering a picnic.
We didn't eat, did we?
No, they didn't give me any food. I don't think they eat. I don't know. But it's, what else was I going to ask? Since we've talked, I've had a lot of things that have come up in my memory I wanted to ask you about. Like, I do have a vague recollection now of one standing right outside my window, and that would explain my phobia of looking out the window at night when it's dark.
Okay, my phobia at night about looking out at windows is because I'm expecting to see something that I'm afraid of and fearful.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm looking quickly, and I'm looking north, south, east, west, corner. No, it's not there.
But you always automatically look, you have like a phobia. I call it a phobia, but I have the same thing. I remember, like, in all my houses, I've always, when I go to the kitchen, if there's a kitchen window, I try not to look out the window. I just do my stuff and turn the light off and go right up back up.
That's right.
I don't want to, like, start looking out the window and go, oh, there he is again. Crap.
And for him to go, well, hello again.
Alex. So, and then for him to say what?
We meet again.
We meet again.
Do you still want me to come with you this time?
Yeah. Have you ever heard of Dan Burish?
No.
Dan Burish is a biologist, and have you ever heard of MJ12 or Majestic 12?
Oh, yeah.
You had Corso's book, didn't you? Philip Corso, The Day After
Yes.
Roswell. Guys, when I was growing up as a teenager, my mother had Philip Corso's book on the bookshelf. That's how I knew about Roswell, before the internet. Because my mother told me about it. And then I've got another video where my bishop at church was at the Roswell cleanup in 47 in July 8th. And he told me about what the dead aliens looked like, and the one with the burnt cheeks that I've got in my picture that I found, that was the one at Wright-Patterson, where Dad worked.
Isn't that strange? It runs in families?
I don't know. Oh, but Dan Burish, I was going to tell you, he's got a video. He was interviewed on Project Camelot, this other podcaster that makes videos, this woman, and she interviews a lot of whistleblowers and people who have alien experiences. And she interviewed Dan Burish, and he's on MJ12. And he said also Dick Cheney's on MJ12. And remember, I worked for him. So I actually know someone who's on MJ12. who's very infamous. But Dan Bursch had the same experience when he was 7 years old. He ended up at Area 51 working underground. He was doing skin biopsies on this alien that had a degenerative skin disease, and they were trying to heal it. So he would go in and take biopsies of the skin and poke it with needles, and it hurt, and it would say, ah, he would be in pain. And he would have to walk like into a submarine chamber, and they had a button where there would be a bomb blow. If anything went wrong, they would blow him up and the alien. That was my message. And he said one time he tripped and the alien jumped up on his chest to communicate with him, and they almost pushed the vacuum button and whooshed him out in vapor.
Oh.
And he said, no, 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 no. And he was telepathically talking to the alien and telling the guys on the radio at the same time, it's okay, he's not hurting me, he's not hurting me. But they had a button where if you went in to be with the alien and anything went wrong or there was any kind of threat to the base or the person in there, they would hit a button and everybody in that enclosure would be blown out the tubes. And he had to prevent that by yelling in his radio, no! But when he was 7 years old, he was in a park and he was playing football with his grandfather. I think it was in Arizona or New Mexico or California. And a craft came down, he got in it and flew off, and he came back, and his father waited underneath a tree. I think this is the story. You can look up Dan Bursch's story when he was a child. But he came back and he said it was a friendly experience, and they flew him around and showed him things, and he came back home. And that's what I did. I think if we took off. Now, if I was in the craft being shown things, I don't know if the door closed and we could have. I think there's no inertia. Like when the ship takes off, you don't go, whoa, like a subway train, you know. You just, poof, you're just going somewhere else, but you don't feel like you're moving.
And they don't want to frighten you.
Right. Which is odd because you hear stories about other abductions that almost sound like a devilish attack, you know, or a demon attack, where these people have the paralysis and they can't move and they just feel this yucky low vibration feeling, and they almost have to cast them out by using the name of Jesus Christ or something, you know. But it's almost like a demonic attack, which I also have had, and I have a video on that too. Remember in the basement in Idaho? So, but this wasn't like that at all.
No, this was mundane.
This was mundane, yes. Worldly. Plain mundane. The worldly plane. Is that all you want to talk about?
For the moment.
For the moment. All right, folks. We might do this show again because we might have more memories come out, and we'll talk about it later. But this is how my mother and I remember our alien fifth kind encounter, close encounter.
Bye.
Bye. Signing off. Ciao, everybody. Bye. Please hit like, subscribe, ring the bell.